Hi, I'm Charlie, and this is Stereo Hysteria. Our March artists of the month, Hushdrops, are a rock band formed in Chicago, whose classic lineup consists of John San Juan on guitar, Joe Camarillo on drums, and Jim Shapiro on bass, all of whom have lent their considerable musical talents to a variety of other projects, including the Webb Brothers, Baruch Assault, NRBQ, as well as previous Stereo Hysteria artists of the month John Langford, Phil Angotti, and Josh Caterer. But the unique chemistry of Hushdrops, as forged through simpatico-musical influences, shared senses of humor, and a certain streak of contrarianism, created a distinctive sound equally enamored of 60s sunshine pop, 90s dream pop, and raw, scrappy, overdriven rock and roll. After briefly disbanding in the mid-2010s, the band reformed and began recording their third album before sessions were interrupted, first by the COVID-19 pandemic, and then by the tragic, untimely passing of Joe Camarillo last January. While still grieving, the rest of the band set about assembling the recordings they had been working on into The Static, a new LP released last November on Pravda Records, a fitting tribute to Joe and the glorious noise they made together. Stereo Hysteria spoke with John San Juan over Zoom about the band's past, present, and future. And we'll be hearing that conversation over the next 2 hours. But we'll begin by hearing the title track of the band's second album, a track featuring guest vocals by Nora O'Connor and Steve Frisbee, called Tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
I've sort of gotten into the habit of starting these conversations asking about your general musical upbringing, if you had particularly musical parents, or if there was a lot of music in the atmosphere when you were growing up.
It was the atmosphere. I'm 52, so, I was a little boy in the 70s. So my parents were just at the age where they were they were boomers. They were going to have records all over the place. And that's how I grew up with it. There were records everywhere. The radio was on everywhere. There was music, a lot of secondhand smoke. And I got the bug from listening to the radio and sort of discovering their collection. So, there weren't any musicians in the family, but, I certainly fell so hard I was such an active listener as a little kid that sort of graduated to wanting to make music and wanting to play music in some way, by the time I was in middle school. And even before then, I remember my best friend and I in, I think, first grade through fourth or whatever, that we would make like these fake instruments out of whatever, like rubber bands and things like that. We were driven to it, some drive to be involved without actually knowing what the mechanics were,
Mm-hmm. Sort of a pre-punk impulse.
Yeah, right. So I seem to remember, I think we mimed for my friend's dad to Helter Skelter, and, we're like, oh, he's not buying it. I think we were genuinely, disappointed that the ruse wasn't more effective.
Was this in New Orleans? Is that where you grew up?
Good question. We moved to New Orleans right around the time that I turned 10.
Okay.
So, yeah, I lived in Kansas City, Missouri before then, but, got my first guitar in New Orleans and had my first experiences playing with other people and playing in jazz band in high school. And we actually played Jazz Fest that year.
Oh, wow.
Which, I don't think I realized what a huge deal that was at the time, but now I look back and think, oh, that's, I'm sort of inwardly very proud of that.
Yeah.
I'm pleased about it,
Because, I was about to say, jazz band is one thing, but jazz band in New Orleans has got to be sort of a higher echelon.
Oh, yeah, because I think that every single, in the state of Louisiana or in that area, I'm sure every region, every high school, every parish, they all had jazz bands. I do remember traveling to do some competition. So, yeah, right. I am inclined to think there was very stiff competition in that area, and that was like, oh, great, you got a jazz band. Yeah, come on over, So we must have been all right. Yeah. I started on guitar. I feel like you get where you're going no matter what you do. Through any road, you'll find your way to where you're going. But I feel like the sort of vocabulary in jazz band, like I had a really good teacher. He was a great arranger. And, I learned also in jazz band that just that 1 year of my life at, 16, 17, I learned all of these chords that I would have never learned otherwise. And these voicings. That's one of those things, some lesson that you're given early in life that you don't necessarily realize that is going to come up later, or you're going to take it with you later. But of course, 35 years later, oh, right, a lot of that musical vocabulary, that sort of expanded musical vocabulary, has surfaced in subsequent years.
Yeah.
However, sort of subtly, in whatever way.
Okay. I did want to ask you about learning guitar, because you're a left-handed player, but you've always had the upside-down strings. Is that right?
Right. Yes, that is correct. Yeah. I don't have an amazing answer for that, but I think that my parents bought me, because I would always pick up, before I ever knew how to play or anything, if we went somewhere and there were instruments, I would pick them up and try to make some kind of music out of them. And, so I feel like my parents and the guy at the music store, because I know my first guitar, they bought it on layaway, so we'd go in every week and I'd play it a little bit. And somehow between all of them, either there was no acknowledgement of he's trying to play it upside down or whatever, or it was just sort of disregarded. Mm-hmm. Like, I've got kids now, so there's a certain thing that you're just so happy that your kid is picking up an instrument or expressing an interest in something that you might not bother to micromanage their initial approach. And I didn't know, but I know I had some songbook and, learned my first few chords from it. Mm-hmm. By the time people started saying you're playing upside down, my feeling was, well, I've been 11 years old. I've been playing for 2 weeks. I've come so far in my musical life now that that's how I play, apparently. I guess I didn't see a problem. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I'm kind of glad that it wasn't corrected because the range of instruments available to me has been far greater. If I go into a recording studio or play with someone, I see so few left-handed instruments, right. And I feel like, now I feel thankful that I have had the ability, I want to buy that Martin there, as opposed to, do they make a left-handed model and do I have to special order it or whatever? I'm sure that it, in some way, in terms of phrasing or do you play guitar at all?
I do, yeah.
Okay. So, all of your sort of habits that you have, I'm sure that there is some sort of inverse compensatory habits that I developed not realizing it, whether it's upstrokes versus downstrokes.
Mm-hmm. Which strings to mute.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And how to mute them and how to phrase certain chords. Undoubtedly there's certain things that are probably voiced differently, not by design, but just for ergonomic reasons, And
I have to say, I've been a big fan of your guitar playing since I saw you play with someone else I've talked to on the podcast, Phil Angotti.
Phil, yeah.
It was you and Phil and John Perrin, Casey McDonough, and Scott Ligon. It was like the 50th anniversary of Revolver.
That was a good night.
You can talk to me. You can talk to me. You can talk to me. If you're lonely, you can talk to me.
Wonderful, wonderful show. Yeah.
A lot of bands that do like a sound-alike or a tribute night or something, they're kind of careful around the songs. And I was kind of struck by how you just sort of were attacking this SG upside down. And I'm like, how are these parts this accurate? Because, it's not easy to play, she said, or and your bird can sing. But to do it with an amount of gusto was really impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. And, there's something, I feel like there's certain people that bring that out in me. I feel like Phil brings it out in me. John Perrin certainly brings it out in me. I think they all do, as well as my own bandmates over the years. It's one of those things, I'm kind of blaming them for the gusto, I guess. Whatever implicit gusto there is, if you've sort of, however many listens I've logged to I Want to Tell You over a lifetime, I think that might create an ambient situation where you're able to play it in some carefree way and still communicate the essence of the arrangement.
Yeah. And that was the main thing that was obvious that night on stage. Everyone who was playing had a deep love for the music, but they also were happy to have fun with it.
Yeah, that was the first time I played with John, actually.
Okay.
So that's a happy memory in a lot of ways.
I specifically remember a moment when you were doing like this sort of extended version of the Monkey's Words. And you called up some of the Tomorrow Never Knows samples.
Oh my God, it's making me very happy that you remember this. Right, I've known a few people in comedy, and I guess that callback is the term, right?
Right.
And the idea that you might find an application for that musically that is both funny and organic in some way.
But yeah, it was great seeing like the cascade of smiles on the musicians' faces as they heard it and realized what was happening.
I mean, those guys, all of them, Casey, every time I've played with him, there is obviously a certain expertise there and great instincts and great knowledge of music and all of these things, but also he will get as playful as you want him to, and I suppose, well, three of them, playing an NRBQ,
right.
That's probably just a crucial part of that gig.
Yeah. World's slappiest virtuosos.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. And I certainly logged in quite a few NRBQ shows over the years in their various iterations.
Taking it back to the early 90s in Chicago, when you moved to Chicago, what was the music scene like? Was it difficult to find like-minded people who had simpatico record collections?
For me, it was. I mean, those are some real peak finding yourself years, like your late teens and early 20s. And I'm thrilled that I'll occasionally meet people who just seem to have been fully formed in some way. John Perrin is someone who kind of strikes me like that. Like, by the time he was 5 years old, he's like, well, yeah, I like the Ramones. I like the Smoking Popes. I like Cannonball Adderley, whatever. And for me, that was like the first sort of creative experiences where original music is being generated. And this was a lot of learning to crawl and a lot of just whatever sort of contemporary influences that I had then, things like The Cure or the Smiths or things like that in the 80s were literally, for want of any better idea, well, it seems like that's how the guitar sort of works in these songs. And, just by instinct, trying to recreate whatever I was seeing or hearing. I had been in a band here for 2 years before I started writing my own songs. I don't know where I thought songs came from, but they didn't come from me, It was probably being around some slightly older people who had been, active for a while. I was friends with the guys in Material Issue, and somehow it must have clicked for me at some point, like, well, they're writing their own songs. Jim's writing those songs, and they do a certain thing. And I was really into the Buzzcocks, and somehow that also seemed like part of the puzzle. Like, not that Pete Shelley's songwriting is anything short of amazing, but something about it seemed attainable, like, as opposed to Yes or something like that. The ingredients seemed like I could actually buy those ingredients and, try to make dinner.
Here's a song released as a single in 1998, which later became the title track for a Bandcamp exclusive compilation of Hushdrops rarities called Radio 1990.
even like someone who had a drum kit, that always seemed like a huge deal. Or
a drum kit and reliable transportation.
Oh, right, exactly. Yeah. So, I was definitely in a real sort of beggars can't be choosers situation, and you're just so driven to play at that age that however you're finding your way is kind of fine. But honestly, the first real super simpatico musical relationship I had was with Joe Camarillo, who was recommended to me by friends, and both of us sort of recommended to each other by friends. And at that point, I was 23, and that was the first time where I'd sort of met up with someone and thought, like, this isn't just competence and ability to execute. Like, there's something high level here that I can't even identify, but I like it, and I'm responding to it, and it's sort of making me better. And not to speak for him, but I feel that for both of us, it was some new plateau of musical relationship where, we can really gel in some way that neither of us knew was available to us previously. At some great length to answer your question, I felt like I was at it for a while before really achieving musical liftoff,
And there was a sort of nascent version of Hushdrops around for a little bit before Joe joined, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it was just, me and a couple of friends that I had, a couple that I'd met from college, and then like friend of a friend. And, it was invaluable because it gave me some practice in, being up in front, having to write, having to sing, just learning how to be in a band and learning how to arrange and, how to whatever extent. I don't want to take too much credit for ever being great at this, but to whatever extent I was the boss, being the boss, sort of learning how to do that. So arguably everything you do, it's like the thing about jazz band, I would apply that to the first band I was in when I came to Chicago, and I apply it to the nascent version of Hushdrops, that all sort of goes in the bank and gains interest in terms of what you're eventually able to do when you really start doing what it is that you do at a certain level.
I did want to ask about one sort of early entry in your discography, and this might take us a little far afield because I have sort of a personal connection to the record, but you play sitar on the first and only Rosehips record, Sol Veronique and Parchment.
I certainly do, yeah. The Rosehips, yeah.
And that's an album that my dad also plays on. He plays lap steel on the song Feel So Lonely.
Oh, really?
And he also put out the album. The album was released by Red Dog Music Group, which was just an indie label that my dad made out of the family house.
That makes, I must know your dad, or certainly would have at the time during the Rosehips era, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. So this is when you were growing up. This was part of the ambience, yeah.
Right. I remember being in second grade. I'm sort of a misfit in second grade because I'm listening to this very anachronistic music. My parents' Monkees and Who and Beatles records. And the next thing I know, Kevin Jr. is standing in my living room, like this rock star in the flesh.
Boy.
He might have been wearing a velvet suit. He had the perfect rock and roll hair. And I remember it came up at some point, and he said, liking the Monkees is cool. Don't...
Yeah.
Your teachers are wrong, your ears are right. Hold on to that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. And Kevin Jr., that's a digression well worth taking because just one of those people. And I remember I was 2021, just laying eyes on him. And, he and I are born a week apart, I think, but he just looked like a rock star, as you say. Obviously he dressed the part and all of that, but I feel like a lot of that just radiated from within. And similarly, as a vocalist, as I felt like the arc of his life's work, his creativity really just continued to improve as he went on, from somewhat humble beginnings, but he always had an outstanding voice. And God, he was just such a natural, how else to put it,
And I can sort of hear a little bit of chamber strings influence in the sound of particularly the first Volume 1 Hushdrops album, just sort of that lush the extra chords, the sixth and the ninths and some of that sort
Oh,
of.
sure. All those extensions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about Kevin every day. Obviously a really cool friendship, but it was like, as with Joe Camarillo and with other people, like where the friendship and the musical relationship are sort of one and the same. Kevin and I were constantly exchanging cassettes. And he was just one of those people. I taped this album, this Epic Soundtracks album for you, and you're going to love it. And of course I did. And similarly, I remember turning him onto the Beach Boys album, Friends. I mean, and we were just kind of feeding each other all of this. Oh God, what a great time that was to be discovering all of those things. And to think that there was a time when I didn't know how much I was going to love the Kinks or how much I was going to love the Zombies or the Left Bank or things like that. So generationally, I feel like he and I were sort of making these discoveries in some parallel fashion, or sort of in tandem, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was really happy, that by the time, I feel like Kevin's body of work pretty well, by the time they made A Month of Sundays, I just felt like he'd made a real quantum leap as a music maker, and he'd found some people who I later played with at different times over the years, who really were able to bring out the best in him musically, But that was an interesting, experience. I remember that vividly, being in my early 20s and, because I was into all of this. Like, I liked My Bloody Valentine. I really liked Nirvana, Teenage Fan Club. Admittedly, some of these bands in their own way, somebody like Teenage Fan Club, like maybe them borrowing quite heavily from the past. But there was a point where I felt like the way that contemporary music was going, that you were sort of getting into the era where you had bands that were like Nirvana, but not as good. And just, it's the natural evolution,
sure.
both of the industry and the form. And, sort of simultaneous to that, if you're finding less and less to sort of grab from right in front of you, and simultaneous to that, you're finding out, from a friend that like, actually, the Turtles were actually really cool. And so it was like taking this hard left at some point, and not so much like Sha Na Na or something where like, I don't like anything after 1973, but just finding the sheer amount of buried treasure that we were all finding then. And I mean, you're talking about the Monkees, that who would have ever thought that we would eventually get to a point where those last few tours, like, they were not churning out the hits. Like, they were up there playing all of these deep cuts and outtakes and, all right, Door into Summer. Cool.
I remember I saw the Mike and Mickey show a couple years back, not the most recent time. When they started Auntie's Municipal Court, there was a guy like, yes! And I'm like, I'm in the right place because I'm the only other person who would jump for joy upon the opening notes of Auntie's Municipal Court.
Oh, yeah. That's, one of their stoniest numbers by any metric. And, that was a real, I think I was in some disbelief. They're doing it. Oh, my God. Yeah. I know it's vindicating, I guess, that, 30 years on, it just seems like the whole world is like, well, yeah, of course. Yeah. Annie's Municipal Court, right on, man. And, the Beach Boys were one of those cultish things in that era. I guess I like the Beach Boys more than Stone Temple Pilots or whatever.
And like at that time, the Beach Boys were doing they were on Full House and they were on Home Improvement. They were just sort of sitcom guest stars. So like listening to Smile Bootlegs must have been just a totally different world.
Oh yeah. And you can't blame, 9 people out of 10 being like, you're into what? Because they're not thinking about, Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, or Till I Die when you mention the Beach Boys. And again, that's one of those things that time goes by and, now that's how many box sets have they had and how many sort of Brian Wilson, how many times has he come to town playing? The fact that Smile was something that was eventually like you could go see in concert is kind of crazy, My kids never lived in a world without Smile. That's a thing to contemplate, I guess.
From a 2004 show at the Hideout in Chicago, here's a bit of the Hushdrops cover of the Beach Boys' Smile centerpiece, Surf's Up. My dad would often bring home like local Chicago CDs. And so he brought home like the Raspberries compilation or the Who compilation that you were on. And especially that Who compilation, Who Done It. I keep going back to that because it's obvious that everyone is like listening to the bonus tracks that are coming out.
Oh, yeah.
So you do like Melancholia and Sensation. There's like a really cool version of Early Morning Cold Taxi. And
yeah, that's right. And Dollface were on there, who we were crazy about. Peoria band. Scott Legan was the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, their tracks on the Who comp I thought those were outstanding.
Because isn't Scott also singing on?
He's singing out in the, I guess on both tracks, Out in the Streets and all the high parts on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yeah.
It's so impressive to do a credible Moon and a credible Daltrey on the same track.
Yes. No, that's really something else. Yeah. You can see why we were crazy about them. And that Raspberries track, I was, although I say it myself, I feel like that had no right to come out as well as it did. And it was just such a weird little moment of happenstance that we ended up doing a track for it. And, I think Joe Camarillo had, maybe like, well, this is a song that we're going to record. And we listened, like I may have played it for him at the beginning of the session or given him a cassette of it. And he's kind of doing all the work there. His, like when he comes in with the sort of very powerful high vocal and his drumming and everything, and he's just really driving that train, so as just sort of a credit to what he could infer from, play me a couple bars of it and we'll see how I do, So I felt very lucky in my musical life to have those types of accomplices and those types of relationships.
From 1996's Raspberries Preserved, a tribute album released on Chicago indie label Ginger Records, here's the Hushdrops rendition of Overnight Sensation.
Well, I know it sounds funny, but I'm not in it for the money, no. I don't need no reputation, and I'm not in it for the show. I just want it right, girl. Wanna hear it on the radio. Wanna be here right. satiric too. If you can get it in the A-side, it's just gotta make a million for you. I just wanna hear the record, yeah. Wanna hear it on the radio. Wanna hear the record. One that everybody's got to know. Yeah. Overnight sensation. Fit my words to a good melody. Amazing how success has been avoiding me so long. Spread my bread, making demos all day. In my head, I can hear the records playing. Hear them record, yeah. Wanna hit 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 record, yeah. Wanna
So when the first Hushdrops album came out, it was, several years into the band's career. And I think it is interesting that you didn't just, as soon as you had a 45-minute set, you just recorded the set and that was the debut album. Volume 1 actually kind of reminds me of a quote that I heard from Mike Mills about the first REM album, Murmur. We were convinced that we were never going to have another opportunity to make an album, and so we just put everything into it. And I hear sort of the same sort of attention to detail in Volume 1.
That's got a lot of TLC, yeah. And I think had we just made a record straight out of the gates, it would not have been that record. It couldn't have been that record. It was born of greater experience. And, again, that whole thing where if you make a record after you've been writing songs for your band for 10 years, it's almost cheating, really, we gave ourselves 10 years to come up with the songs. But that is in essence what happened, that we had a lot to choose from and had also kind of learned a lot about recording and our sort of developed instincts over the years. So I think it's just as well. I mean, who knows what would have been had we, had a little more hustle, in our 20s, but, I guess the strength of that record is that it is given that much TLC. I mean, we never did it again because, that was just in terms of the sounds that we use and a lot of, experimenting with the arrangements. And I've never spent that much time on a project since. So it has a certain polish that I dig it. It was almost like our version of a Steely Dan record or something. Without being aware of it at the time, I sort of looked back on it. It was like, I can't believe that's us. That, you're able to take, without losing the character of the band, but to sort of really have it be that refined or finessed or whatever.
From 2004's Volume 1, here's a song featuring guest lead vocals by Kevin Jr. called Kevin Jr.
I know the way. What do you say? Don't waste a day or a lifetime. Now that you're there, breathing the air, leaving your cares where you found them. What do I care? Coasting along, dreaming a song. It won't be long, or Blue Monday. Taking my time, resting my mind. Out before 5 on a Sunday. Far from their eyes. Follow your eyes. Think what you may, I'd rather stay here where the days become longer. Don't waste a day. Don't waste a day. Don't waste a single day.
And I also like on the album, I guess this is sort of on all the albums, but on that album in particular, there's a lot of different voices, not just your own. And I think that's always been a cool thing about Hushdrops records, that obviously Joe's voice is the first thing that you hear on Divine. And, you know, Kevin Jr.'s voice on Kevin Jr. is really cool to hear a lot of different unexpected voices, that it's not the same personnel throughout.
No, it's funny. I don't think I was aware of this at the time. I wasn't aware that that's what we were doing. People had mentioned this in, later years, that like, wow, you're really giving up all of this sort of valuable real estate to other vocalists. And I thought about it. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it's not the done thing, Typically people want to be heard, and they want to, I couldn't imagine like a Neil Young album where like you don't hear Neil's voice until the third song or something like that. Just would never happen.
Unless it's trans.
Oh, sure. Right. I stand corrected. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. But right. There's certain sounds that obviously, like the song Kevin Jr. Honestly, I loved Kevin's voice. It's just one of those things. It's like, I'm looking for something on this song. I don't feel like I can achieve the effect that I'm looking for. I think Kevin could, as he did. And similarly, Divine was a co-write. Joe and I had written it together, and for the longest time, for something like 7 years, we never really kept our stories straight about who was singing it, who was the vocalist, because there's videos, I converted all these VHS tapes last year and go through and see, like, do a show and I was singing it, and then a month later do a show, Joe's singing it, and it kept going back and forth. So even up to the point of recording it, we both laid down vocals for it, and listening to the playback, listening to both versions of it, like, oh God, clearly this is Joe's song to sing. And, then it was very obvious.
Yeah.
I'll build a world for you to fit in. Try with all my might. When your world comes crashing down, the darkness turns to light. So divine. Are you afraid when angels visit? Do they stay all night? Do they give you songs to play? Angelic copyright. So divine. Divine. Let me surround you. Divine. There's love all around you. Let me surround you. Divine. There's love all around you. Divine.
And right, the female voices, some of this was the product of having a baritone voice, like a sort of Gene Clark sort of range where, I can sing and I can be expressive, but like a lot of what I was hearing in my head sounded more like, Broadcast or the Cardigans or Stereolab, or there's a song by Bell and Sebastian that was out when we were making that record called Legal Man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the vocal sound on that, like, that's a really compelling sound. And I feel like I want to hear that sound on a record. So, yeah, I guess it's absolutely a characteristic of that album that, I'm on there enough, I think, but there are all of these other voices in prominent places, and to a degree that is maybe a little atypical. And I swear I had no idea that I was doing that, at the time.
Yeah, it gives it a great variety to the sound.
Thank you. That's cool. And that may be a personal insecurity or whatever, or just a fetish of wanting, because that was, again, I had no guarantee, like, well, what if we don't ever make another album? And certainly we didn't for a while after that. That sort of, make it like it's going to be your last. There was a sense of, even if not so deliberately with the voices, just with every element, like, okay, so we can't just have like one type of song that we do 45 minutes of or 12 versions of. it's all going to sound like us, but the idea of the way that I liked the White Album, where it just seemed to keep going from place to place and contain all of this variety in it. I sort of had this sense that like, oh, we really got to show people, we got to show the world all the things that we believe we can do. And this sense that it's like an ADHD thing, like of channel surfing or something, where I don't want people to get bored. I remember kind of that was a subconscious drive, which, hopefully was a virtue in the end,
Here's another highlight from Volume 1, featuring guest vocals by Laura Catter, called Dr. V.
Come with me, if you please. Cast your dreams to the bottom of the sea. Vanity, luxury, sentence me to the care of Dr. V.
And when you were making Volume 1, it was just you and Joe as the official Hushdrops. Jim didn't join until a little later, right?
That is correct. Yeah, Jim had not joined yet. And that was kind of fine because Joe and I had some very good musicians over the years in the bass chair, but it never settled. Like, we never had the third guy. It was always a bit like me and Joe and then a bass player.
Okay.
So it's no wonder that they would come and go, given that dynamic. Mm-hmm. It was not through any deliberate means, but it was just a hard puzzle for anyone to that point to fit into, in all sorts of ways, just various quirks of personality that Joe and I had. So I was happy that at the point that we did the bulk of the recording for that it was just the two of us, because it wasn't like trying to shoehorn a sort of band into this record making thing. It was really, it's like the fewer people are there, it's taking the power trio idea even further. The fewer personnel, the more expression. If you had 12 people going at the same time, it's got to be pretty organized. Mm-hmm. And so, that worked to our advantage, and it has a lot of just every wacky idea that Joe or I had. There was no one there to say no or to kind of, frown on it. And there's just a unity that comes from, the bulk of everything instrumentally, virtually everything being the two of us. Mm-hmm. But I know that Jim came along about a year after we finished the album. And, Jim's been with me ever since. So something clicked there.
From a 2007 show in Peoria, Illinois, here's a live version of a song originally by The Bugs called Elemental Stew.
At some point, I don't know how many years later, we had talked about, well, do we want to make another record? We've got some more songs here. And Joe had the direction. He had the idea. And he says, well, somebody had written a review. It's funny, the things that stick with people. Somebody had written a review of Volume 1 where, possibly because of the work that Joe and I had done with other people, they had mentioned something about studio rats. And I think that irked Joe in some way. So all that he knew after having his reaction to that, to maybe feeling mischaracterized in some way, it was like, well, if we could get our live sound on a record, then, I'd want to do that. That seems like that's kind of that's a goal worth chasing. That's a goal worth having. So he put that out there, and that sort of gave us our subsequent directive for recording and making records. And I don't know that I would have thought of that, but he noticed that there was something that happened on stage, maybe a certain spontaneity or energy or something that, Volume 1's got a lot of variety. It may not have a lot of that. So to his way of thinking, like, well, I kind of remember the way that he was proposing it was also like, I don't even know if it's possible. I don't know how we do it, but this is what I believe we should be doing.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, listening to Tomorrow, it does definitely have a lot more overdriven guitar. There's a lot more like jamming at the end of songs. Yeah, it definitely has that unique Hushdrops, the feeling of probably a lot of it is Joe's sense of timing, and a lot of it is your voice and chord voicings and way of playing the guitar, particularly playing loud guitar.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess the fact that whatever the first things that we did for Tomorrow, Joe and Jim and I had been playing together for 3 years at that point, just gigging. And by the time we finished it, we'd been playing together for, a decade, I guess. So there was something of a dynamic that there was actually something to document. Mm-hmm. And so Jim's participation and Jim's involvement and his contribution has a lot to do with that. But right, once you knew, well, we're going to try to do something raw and leave room for the human error and, have some abandon and real mistakes. And it's weird. There's a way to narrate that can sound very kind of cheesy. But by then, I guess we were at a point where, well, yeah, just do what you do on stage, and we'll all just do what we do on stage. And it worked, I guess. Joe's concept worked.
Here's a highlight from the second Hushdrops LP, the 2014 double album, Tomorrow, a song called Vague. And another interesting part of that album's sound is that it is mixed in mono. I'll admit that I'm very much a stereo listener, as the name of my podcast suggests.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, you've made an exception for me, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
Sometimes mixing in mono can be sort of like something that you notice right away, that there's not that kind of stereo ambience to it. But after listening to it again, I'm just like, man, this really works in mono. It gives it a very like AM radio otherworldliness. You know, if AM radio had Crazy Horse style jams at the end of songs.
Well, yeah, and that's, I think, two things feeding each other. Like the idea of, okay, well, let's do something with less layering and fewer overdubs and just as little stuff as we can put on it as possible. That makes it easier to go into mono, but also like the more you're going into mono, we probably shouldn't clutter this up too much in one way or another. Or if we do, it'll be sort of, whatever we do have on here, it's not going to be an issue of having everything being prominent, but more having an almost indecipherable blend at times, which, is kind of its own thing. That's its own characteristic. Yeah. I like, a lot of things from the mono era. The Brian Jones Rolling Stones era. Mm-hmm. I feel like I could go years and, some Warhorse, some classic song that I've heard a million times, like, oh, there's a piano on there. There's a piano part on there, because of a lot of things, but because of like, well, look, we're mixing a mono and we're not, I guess things are forced to blend to some extent in a way that can be virtuous. I guess it's ambiguous or, misleading potentially. Speaking for myself, I know that when I discovered, probably in my 20s, and the Beatles would have been the gateway there. Although, again, the Beach Boys, a lot of their stuff like only existed in mono.
Right.
When I started getting mono copies of the Beatles records, it was like, it's the same performance, but it's a little tougher sounding, for lack of a better word. It seemed a little more present. So I guess in line with what we were doing, it seemed like, you know what, we're going to do it in mono. Really just take this as far as we can. And there's something to be said for that, just that it's a human tendency to exaggerate, like cartoonishly sort of exaggerate your idea as much as you can. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if we can do first takes and we can, have Jim's headphones fall off, halfway through the take or whatever, but, maybe that's not going to be, maybe we need to go mono too.
Maybe that's not enough. Let's make it a double album.
Right, exactly. Oh God, yeah, double album. That's right. Because we had a lot of sort of shared, just the three of us. The glue that held us together was all of these things, these musical things, but also a certain contrarianism and whatever. Like the idea that the person next door to you would never, like they weren't going to record in mono or they weren't going to make a double. And I'm not claiming these as like, these are the best ideas that anyone in music has ever had, but they were definitely driven by a certain oppositional defiance disorder or something, the collective one that we had as a band.
Do you think that came from the fact that you all have had maybe higher profile positions in other bands where you're not necessarily the boss, and like Hushdrops is the band where you are the boss and you get to make the final say?
I'm sure that's a factor. Yeah. And I think a lot of us, all three of us, there's a limit to how much I want to represent, specifically in detail, Joe and Jim's experiences, but we'd all had a lot of experiences where, someone else was ultimately calling the shots, and yeah, you didn't always agree with it. And as you thought, well, look, when I get to make my own record, it's not going to be like that, or, and so I think in the Hushdrops, whatever hierarchy we had within the band, it was very much a thing where each of us was the boss of something. And in some way, you could say like, well, okay, so John named the band and was there first and wrote the songs, but the way that Joe and Jim played, it's so obvious, like, okay, they're absolutely driving the car when we played. I've never had anything like it before or since, where, when we're playing a song, everyone's the boss to some extent. I don't think you could go into Bryan Adams's band and, I'm going to slow it down a little here, and I'm going to, play some like comical bends in a solo or whatever sort of impulses. I mean, we just felt like our playing has always been so impulsive. And yeah, there's a lot of places where wouldn't be encouraged or permitted, really. So yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of that, I guess the attitude of the band, probably much of it does derive from maybe having been in other settings that were more restricting.
From 2014's Tomorrow, here's a song featuring bravura performances from each band member, called Have We Gone Too Far?
I don't know where we're going. Have we gone too far? Have we gone too far? Would you believe I'm just trying to prove if you just look at me? Well, I think you agree that we've gone too far. I don't know where we're going. Have we gone too far? Have we gone too far? No second hand will give you the answer. You take every
So after the release of Volume 2, or tomorrow, I want to call it Volume 2, but after the second album came out, there was a bit of a hiatus or a breakup, or how would you characterize it?
Well, it's been long enough that I don't think I have to really censor myself, but we did that record. I love that record. I'm really proud of it, but it was fraught in a lot of ways. And it was fraught from within in some ways and from without in some ways. I think that I felt like there were a series of decisions that we made in terms of, and that at a certain point, you're just getting defaulted into one after another with recording personnel or recording venue, that those felt like the best decisions we could make at the time. But I think they inflamed a lot of the issues that we were starting to have in the band. I think Jim's commitment at the time to, you can't just keep going in and fixing parts. Like, I think, didn't we all talked about this? We all agreed that this was going to be a warts and all, undertaking. And like, I happen to like everyone's mistakes a lot. That there was some dissent in that area. And, that was a hard thing. If you've got people, neither of whom feels that it's their job to back down. There were a lot of things that got inflamed within the band. So then we put out the record, we got through that. We toured it for about a year, just a series of like, all right, well, we can do a Friday in Detroit and a Saturday in Toronto and be home for dinner on Sunday, just to get out there and sell a record. And also the feeling like, well, Cleveland's never seen Hushdrops before. They need to deal with Hushdrops, whatever, in our sort of collective pride in, what we were doing at the time. So we did that, and it was really fun. We played some great shows. But, again, I think it probably put some mileage on the relationships and on the three-person dynamic. I remember at the end of that we started rehearsing a bunch of new songs. I wrote a handful of songs sort of at the end of that, and enough that we started rehearsing them, and it sounded great. And I was eager to, let's make another record while we're hot. Let's get in and record these. And something about where we were at that point, and even the discussions about making another record and some of the other interactions that we're having within the band, just again, that's like 10 years of unresolved conflicts that have sort of gone into the bank and gained interest and never really been resolved, or that we hadn't sort of found our workarounds, I guess. I just kind of realized, like, I felt like we'd achieved gridlock. That's probably the best word I could use for it. That there wasn't a way forward for us. And I made the decision, that, but I don't know. I think each of us in our own way made the decision, even though strictly speaking, I was the one that left. I didn't feel like I had any choice. My feeling at that point was, I'm still writing songs and I have this sort of musical energy and I want to make music. And what it took me several years to realize was that it's great that you can put your own name on the marquee, but it isn't the Hushdrops and it's not as special. And I think we all had to live without the band, I think, to maybe appreciate how valuable it was to each of us. I certainly did. I mean, we all sort of, by our own accounting, have said this to each other in subsequent years, that going and playing with other people, whatever problems we had, we'd gotten spoiled by being in Hushdrops, and whatever musical experiences we were all contriving outside of that, it's like, no, like, when something's not, taste this. It's, whatever, something's not as great as it could be or as it has been. So I will say I'm happy that we split up in retrospect, because I think that we all needed to be able to appraise the value of what we had and really appreciate it. And when we started making, these very furtive moves towards getting back together, and always on some, sort of trial basis, or, well, it was never about getting the band back together. Like, it was literally like, oh, I've got this gig, would you guys want to do this thing? And it's one undertaking in one night. We did a couple of things like that. And it was just one of those things, like the first note where everyone's playing. It's like, I don't know. Did you watch Get Back?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember when Billy Preston shows up and
the vibe gets instantly better?
Oh man! And then you see their faces, and I think Paul has this look like he's, somebody's, put a banana in his shoe or something, like this look of real awe and surprise. So those experiences we had playing together again were exactly that. It was like our Billy Preston moment with each other. I think that made the remaining years of the trio a lot more special. It made them a lot more fun. And yeah, even just the social aspect of being together, we appreciated it. That was another thing that obviously we had undervalued it, the fact that we didn't have the tools to nurture it or whatever the first time around, or, just whatever it is that would cause a band to hit a brick wall like that. I know that when we came back together, somehow the contents had settled. I'm sure there's recipes like that where like, let content settle for 3 years or whatever. And, so that was what happened in our case. And we just had this really joyous final act, the three of us did, that I'm really thankful for. And I guess that is the thing that can happen, that we couldn't have just skipped to that. For better or worse, it did take an interruption to bring us to a place of working at full mojo,
Sort of a necessary obstacle.
Right, exactly. Just, having something to miss,
Up next, we'll hear an instrumental from last year's The Static, showcasing the Hushdrops musical interplay called The Lummox. I can definitely hear on the album, The Static, there seems to be a palpable sort of joy in musical collaboration. And it sounds like the people playing on the record are listening to each other very carefully.
We found a different gear for sure. And it was, really weird. Yeah, it's not like something like, I stopped being a horrible person or, somebody started doing what I told them. It was nothing as prosaic as all that. Just, somehow our ability to operate and execute, some of that may just be being in a different stage of adulthood, but we came back together musically and personally. But the first couple of gigs that we did, right when we got back together, right out of the gate, like we weren't playing our old songs. Like we'd maybe do one or two, but I swear, like, there's like a gig where we're doing like 11 new songs, and it's only our second gig playing new songs. So the gig before that was probably, like 9 new songs. It's just, it's a weird thing to remember now. Like it seems improbable in some way that how could we have even mustered that? To me, it seems like a hell of an undertaking, but the record shows that that is what happened. And yeah, by the time we were recording, we had so much new material to work with. And yeah, there was just something about what we were doing together. It had some version of the informality that we'd been striving for with Tomorrow, but almost like an even more natural version of it or something.
When Joe passed away, how much of the Static did you have already in the can?
We had a lot of music recorded. Joe and I had done a session right before the three of us had started playing together again. And it was just on the basis of like, well, I know Joe and I can record together. And he and I recorded, I think, 7 songs that day. And then he went off and played with Angati that night. Then we did one session with the three of us about a year later where we recorded 10 songs in a day.
Oh, wow.
Again, this all sounds, I was there and I know it happened, but as I'm narrating it, it sounds like I can't do that. That sounds really ambitious, and let the record show that is what happened. So we had a lot of music recorded, but we didn't have all of the music recorded. There were some really special songs that we were planning to record. Some of my favorites on the album, like Psychic Space and Secrets and The Moment. And one of the guys, the idea was, okay, well, we'll go in the spring of 2020 and we'll record these songs. And we had a couple others as well. And of course, that didn't happen by the time we would have been able to go into the studio, or by the time of that booking, everything was shut down. And, Joe and I talked a lot on Messenger about the record and what it was going to be like. And we're still writing individually. And so had he lived, what it would have been in its finished form would be very different than what it is now. So it was just this project that we were going to come back to eventually, along with playing live and everything else. And then, unfortunately, Joe died about a year ago. And this is right before we were all, going to start getting vaccinated, and certain aspects of our lives were indeed going to open up again. And, it wasn't a concern of mine. When he died, I wasn't thinking about music, or I didn't pick up a guitar for months, and I wasn't thinking about our work or anything like that. And I think that a month or so, 6 weeks, 2 months had passed. And, I felt like, well, we've got all of this music recorded, and I really like the performances. I like Joe's contribution a lot. I like what he's playing and how we all affected each other and influenced each other within the band on these recordings. And it seems like it'd be a shame to sit on it, only because, this is some of his best work and some of our best work. And that led to some very last minute creative thinking where I knew that we had been sort of surreptitiously, not sneakily, but we had played a gig that we didn't know had been recorded, which I'm happy for now, because better to play like you're not being recorded, I think.
Right.
And, I was able to track down the multi-tracks for that. And sure enough, Joe's playing was just phenomenal on those tracks. And I was like, okay, so we can do Hushdrops recordings of these songs if Jim and I played a Joe here, played a live Drunken Joe, and live Drunken John and Jim barely make it onto the tracks because I think in total, the three of us sounded pretty, they're great performances, but there's a palpable looseness that may have exceeded our goals. Okay, well, this could just obfuscate the song in some way, surely we could put in-tune vocals on this, not flam with Joe when he comes in on the one of the chorus. There were a couple songs that we, sort of Frankenstein in that fashion, and a couple others that I had demos of that John Perrin ended up recording drums for, and just really playing beautifully and in such a way that I guess there's a commonality in his and Joe's approaches to the instrument where, yeah, I don't, I've listened to the album and I don't necessarily hear like, okay, well now there's a different drummer here.
Sure.
It all just sounds like Hushdrops.
From last year's The Static, here's a track featuring Joe's drumming, as taken from that surreptitiously recorded live show, called Psychic Space.
I'm satisfied the earth will shift tomorrow, just like it did today and yesterday. The house next door seems closer than I know it used to be. They're telling me it's always been this way. Psychic space, I took more than you gave. I spent more than you saved. Now we should all be on our way. Don't sacrifice the purpose of tomorrow. Don't dignify the things you did today. Don't you embrace the cut and paste of what we're all here for. Stop telling me it's always been this way. Psychic space, let's take a long drive all around. Close the shades and mute the phone, and tell the neighbors we're not home. Psychic space, I took more than you gave. I spent more than you saved. Now we should all be on our way.
Yeah, I was about to say it's remarkable how cohesive the album is as a whole, considering it does have this sort of piecemeal construction.
Yeah, and I don't know what I would attribute that. It could be any number of things, whether it's the spirit of it, But it was completed in a real, like, the journey from we should finish this record to you need to send the masters off to the mastering place was pretty short. As I started sending Ken over at Pravda, with whom I'd gotten the Josh Caterer deal through him, just kind of cold calling, like, oh, you know what? Me and John Perrin and Josh Caterer are playing, and here's what it sounds like. I don't know if you're into it or not, but a real, like, let me know what you think of it. Similarly, I just started sending him Hushdrops tracks, and it looked like, I think we are going to be making a record. In neither case, really thinking a deal was going to come out of it. But of course, once it was like, okay, yeah, we're going to move forward with this, I think Ken had already seen what was happening with vinyl production and what was beginning to happen with it. So his approach to everything was just like, yeah, I need it yesterday and I need this yesterday. And thank God that he pushed me in that way, because I think left to my own devices, I probably wouldn't have tinkered with the sound of it a bit more, but we had an abundance of content. And, so there would, well, do we put this song on side 2 or this song? Because up to the very last second, I think I FedExed to the masters that evening, the album sides. And, that day I was still with our engineer, still talking about, put that one on 3rd on side B. So there's some little lingering, nagging wonder in my mind, like, and it's immaterial now because the album exists and it is what it is, but always like, is there an alternate timeline where there's some song that's swapped that suddenly makes it Sergeant Pepper, But I think ultimately having to have made those final decisions, just as snap decisions, like, okay, on that tight of a deadline, I feel like there's a lot of times where that sort of thing ends up working in your favor as a record maker. What is it that people say, that your first idea is supposedly your best idea, and
right, first thought, best thought.
Right, so you get a lot of first thoughts when you're under the gun like that. Hopefully that worked out to our benefit.
And I think that the album really works as not just a tribute to Joe, but sort of a tribute to Hushdrops, as the album has a lot of the quirks that make the band so special.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope that all of that comes through, and I've hoped that the longer it's out there in the world, I've sort of gotten some feedback that, like, if for some reason we just really, on what we didn't know was going to be our final go round, but, we really embraced all of these, like, track debris and all of this stuff that's, just the opposite of professional record making for some reason, and not like, it wasn't like something we talked about or planned or anything like that, but it just kept happening that somebody would play some wacky little improv or a bit of musical punctuation at the end of a song after a take or something like that. And you're like, normally you would fade it out. And it was just like, no, actually, I think that's part of the song. That's part of the sound. Maybe
right.
That is ultimately the sound of the band. Right. Is that not a thing where you hear, and there's other people that you've spoken with about their work where they'll say, well, we were trying to do this, or we were trying to make that. They're talking about a song or a record. And, of course, you never end up, we were trying to make Loveless or something like, of course, you never end up doing that. But that directive might lead you to something that's more inherently yours. I know Tonight's the Night by Neil Young was one of the things that personally really spoke to me. It's the way the songs kind of lurch in, and it's got all the stuff that you would normally airbrush out.
Right.
It's all there. And so, our version of that, for some reason, it just grew to be a feature of the band that we all really increasingly loved.
The essence of Ditch.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting because, you play it for, people have heard it now, and, we haven't gotten a negative reaction like, you guys really should have tightened up those endings a lot more, or, anything like that. It seems like the unkemptness of it, the stubble, whatever, it seems like that may be either it's acceptable or it's actually something that's enjoyed,
Right. A feature, not a bug.
Exactly. Yeah. I guess if you do it enough times, it does become a style. Yeah.
Just judging by the reaction to Joe's passing, I know that a large percentage of my Facebook friends were just openly mourning, because I didn't know him that well, but we had crossed paths a couple times and we were Facebook friends. I always appreciated how open he was with letting people join in with, like, the music pun games.
Oh, God. He was a bottomless pit for that type of wordplay and absurdity. But right,
it was never like an in-joke that anyone was excluded from. It was like everyone was welcome to come in and play along.
Yes, yes. And boy, I mean, to his credit, that is something that, in the past year, I've heard this a lot. And I've, in my own reflection, have really realized like, oh yeah, like he was an incredibly perceptive person. And, so a lot of times if there was a rat to be smelled, he was the first person who smelled it. And he might be the only person who smelled it, which is, obviously a very frustrating position to be in. If something was jive and, he's the guy that's got to like, guys, I don't want to do this or, but far more relevantly, his just sort of generosity, his ability to see like the good in people and sort of the essence of a person. Yeah, I was stunned, and I felt like, well, I know him as well as anybody, given the strength and the depth and the duration of our friendship. But, it was like finding out like somebody's husband dies and they find out like, oh, he had families all over town, it was, in terms of, how loved he was and how widely beloved he was and the types of friendships he'd forged. And there's people like that, but they're few and far between. And he was definitely one of them.
The one time that I played on the same stage, my band, The Dyes, was opening up for the Waco Brothers. It was one of their Shubas sort of after Christmas end of year shows. We got the email from the promoter that said, bring your guitars, bring your breakables, and you can use the Waco's backline. And so I sort of gingerly went up to him. I'm like, hi, I'm Charlie. I'm playing in the opening band tonight. And I'm told that I can use your set, but like I've got all my stuff in the car. So if you want me to get my snare or my cymbals or my pedals and he just like, they're drums. You hit them.
Oh,
you can't hurt these guys. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Thank you. And sure enough, like it was such a solid set. And I feel like I played better on it because I wasn't like hitting the kick drum and suddenly it lurches forward a couple inches.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I got to say, and you're obviously a multi-instrumentalist. So there's certain things about his understanding of drums and how they worked, both of like, well, tuning and just how to set up a kit and making it so that like, right, it's not going to lurch. And similarly, like, oh yeah, go ahead, beat the hell out of it, right. He wasn't precious about it in a way that, I've seen just a very different type of drummer, I've seen people be very sort of persnickety about their gear and
yeah. Don't touch his drums. They loom large in his legend.
Right. Exactly. And Joe's just like, well, honestly, what are you going to do to him? Like, I'm going to be happy if you play your heart out on him. And I certainly don't want to move him, Yeah, but, yeah, right. He really just understood what are they for if not to be played. Yeah.
Here's another highlight from The Static, a song called Tomorrow Takes the Sun.
Tomorrow takes the sun. Well, that's how it's done. Now everybody's talking. Tomorrow takes the sun. When all is said and done, well, today was fun, 'cause that's when we went walking. Tomorrow takes the sun. Can't tell anyone, the future might be done. A hit and run, we're only having fun. Tomorrow takes the sun. Tomorrow takes the sun. Told the whole world you could fly underneath your bluest sky. Thought this day would never come. Tomorrow takes the sun. Well, that's how it's
talked about yesterday, we've talked about today. Let's talk about tomorrow, which I'm sure if there was a word cloud of Hushdrops song lyrics, that would be a very big word.
Yeah, there was nothing I could do about that. I mean, that really, that just, you have to go with it, I think.
But what does the future hold for the Hushdrops? I know that you've done some shows with John Perrin on drums. You've scheduled some more shows.
Yeah. My feeling for the longest time, after Joe died was like, well, that's, we can't recreate that thing. Obviously, like Joe took so much of that with him. So my feeling was that was a cool thing that we had. And I'm very lucky to have been a part of it. But that's that. I didn't really think about it. And then, at some point, like, the record's coming out, and Jim and I had talked about, and I talked to a bunch of people about this, about, well, we're going to have to do, because Joe died in like the dead of winter, and it was just freezing out, and nobody was vaccinated yet. And it was not a great time to congregate. But it was like, well, he really deserves some sort of send off, maybe in the summer, or, at some point when, we can do it safely. And, so we had ended up doing this show at the Hideout in September. And it was us and the Wacos and Angati, and what kind of ended up being sort of a version of the Flat Five, just all people that had admired and played with him. And Jim and I played with a friend of ours, Bill Swartz, and it was just sort of on the basis of like, all right, well, we'll do this one gig and do a Hushdrops show, do a Hushdrops set, but just a one-time thing. We Hushdrops have to play for this, and there's some closure or whatever. And we found that in doing it, the rehearsals and the gig and having the whole experience, that both of us had a real attachment to playing with each other and to playing that music. Whatever our 2/3 of it was that we'd kept, I feel like Joe may have taken more than a third with him, but, whatever it was that Jim and I, whatever experience it was that we were having, we talked like a week later, and I was like, I'd play again. I don't think Joe wants us to stop playing. Again, I mean, just such an unselfish person that it could just as easily been a thing where, even if he were living, or I'm not able to do this thing, but you guys should go and do it. He was just like that. But at any rate, once we'd had the experience of playing together and playing the music, we felt like whatever's next, we shouldn't stop playing together. Like, we've got a good thing here, just purely in terms of the sort of musical satisfaction. And Sean Perrin just seemed like, well, who else? He's on the record. I've got this sort of multifaceted relationship with him through like doing Beatles stuff and doing the Josh Caterer trio. So I know that we're, and I feel that he and Jim, like those two will have a good thing. We've done a show with John, and the only challenge at this point is just the scheduling. John's a busy man, but Jim has this gigantic bass amp. He has this Fender tube amp, and I swear the head weighs something like, an atomic ton or something.
It's a 2-person operation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we were talking about, like using your amp, if you have an amp that's kind of your sound, like, well, yeah, bring your amp, he had talked about like, surely I have a sort of finite number of amp moving years left in me. So I should bring the amp for the remainder of those, and I'll know when I can't bring the amp anymore. And I guess that's our feeling about playing together.
If you can, you should.
Exactly. Yeah. We're both here. We're able to, we should. Yeah, exactly. So, it's not a huge plan, and it's not a massively ambitious plan, and who knows where it will lead or what will happen. But yeah, for now, the plan is you show up and you play, and we sort of discovered too, through doing the show that we did, the benefit show, it was our first time playing without Joe, and our first time playing in, at that point, nearly 2 years. So we kind of went into it really not knowing what our plan was, and I think tried to put together something fairly, for want of any other way to do it, or even considering that there was any other way to do it, just, some effort to put together something kind of slick and structured. And honestly, once we had done that, Jim and I both turned to each other and said, well, that wasn't what we did with Joe, and that wasn't our MO. And, so we sort of learned from that first gig experience that, okay, well, from here on out, maybe we could go up there without too much of a plan and just allow something to happen, whether it's what songs we play or, because I guess that's, again, I don't want to keep picking on Bryan Adams here, but for some reason he's become the poster boy for I would imagine that there is not a great deal of variation in how Summer of '69 is played from night to night for the past 40 years or whatever. I don't know that we're capable of executing that type of, musical experience, but also I don't think that's what we're looking for. I don't know that would be satisfying, and John Perrin, if you're going to have someone up there going on this sort of, we don't know what we're doing adventure, he is a great person for it. And that's sort of, and it's no mistake that he's been, in NRBQ for over 6 years now.
Yeah, I've been a friend of John's for a while, probably since he was a teenager, and our bands would play together at congregational churches and stuff, but I've seldom seen him hit the wrong drum.
Yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful thing, and I'm very happy that Josh Caterer had the foresight or just the instinct to put the three of us together, for his musical goals and purposes. So I would have never thought of it in a million years, but, once he said, oh, so yeah, I was thinking that me and you and John Perrin could play. It was just like, I'm sure we could play. Now that I'm hearing you say it out loud, it sounds like the most natural thing in the world. Josh's ability to arrange a standard in a completely original way is just, that's a beautiful thing.
And that's just about all the time we have for our salute to the Hushdrops. Thanks for listening, and a special thanks to John San Juan for sharing his time and insights. If you'd like to listen to and purchase Hushdrops music, direct your browser to the band's Bandcamp page at hushdrops.bandcamp.com, and for more information, join the band's fan page by searching Facebook for Hushdrops. But before we go, we'll hear one more track from The Static, featuring drumming from John Perrin, mellotron by Carolyn Engelman of the Chamber Strings, and backing vocals by Nora O'Connor, called One of the Guys. This is Charlie, signing off.